Our pleasure to welcome now DeKeither Stamps. He's the Public Service Commissioner for Mississippi's Central District. Commissioner, good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me back again.
You bet. So you and I talked a little bit offline about some rate requests that have been increased requests that have been submitted to the PSC in accordance with the way our regulatory policy works by Entergy. And we were just curious about that, wanted to get your take on it. It appears from just reviewing the documents that at least a part of the reason for that rate request is the additional load placed on the system by the big AWS project in Madison. So how does that work?
Well, for me, instead of speaking specifically on a case that I'm going to have to rule on, what I'll do is I'll lay out my principles.
Okay.
When it comes to any developer, if you need it, you buy it. Whether it's a subdivision or it's AWS, I approach it from a standpoint, if there are investments that need to be made and the rest of the ratepayers shouldn't have to subsidize any of these things, if you need something to do your business and do it well and be an effective partner in Mississippi, if you need it, you buy it when it comes to these large load data centers and these other large load carriers.
So just looking at the actual request documents themselves, which I have reviewed, in particular, there's one of the projects that Entergy is naming Cosmos. I think it's typical whenever they have these new power plants that they're building, they will assign some sort of code word name to them. This one's Cosmos, that from the documents appears to be dedicated exclusively to the AWS project. Best I can tell, maybe that's not the case. But when I look at the breakdown of the rate request, the percentage of the rate that the rate request they're looking for to the various rate classes, it looks like that residential customers are shouldering just under 46% of that. So is that something? I know you said you're not prepared to tell us how you're going to rule on this at this point, but it's my understanding that when the law was passed that provided AWS a number of concessions and just provisions for them to come here, signed into law by our governor, that these additional energy costs would be borne by them and not ratepayer consumers.
Well, those are the discussions that we had during that time period. But again, my view of the public utility staff and our staff at the Public Service Commission, when they make these rulings, they'll send it through a process, and we'll be waiting for their recommendation on the back end.
Okay.
Of which way to proceed on it.
Okay. But can you at least tell us, is this your understanding of it, the way I described it, that they would be responsible for bearing the cost of the investment that Entergy would have to make in order to provide the necessary service?
Again, back to my first comment, my stance with developers at most levels, especially when it comes to data centers across the state of Mississippi, if you need capacity, if you need those things, then you purchase it.
Okay. So then let me pose the question to you this way, because I don't feel like you're answering it directly, and that's fine. You may not be able to. I don't know how your process works and your governance works, but if it turns out that Entergy is asking for consumers to bear some of the cost associated with the investment they're making to increase capacity, generation capacity, and transmission to accommodate AWS, would you approve such a request?
Well, first, we got to review the rate case, or review the proposal that's being put forward. And I feel very confident the public utility staff is going to issue a good recommendation, and we'll work through it. But pulling back without speaking specific on something I'm going to have to rule on, or being prejudgmental about something and kicked off the case, what I've always said since the beginning, if Amazon or if it's NVIDIA or the other data center partners that we've welcomed here in Mississippi, if there's capacity that's necessary, those entities purchase what they need to run their operations. That's been my standpoint since pre-law, as the law was written, and with all of the hyperscalers that we put out on the table. So I'm not going to speak specific about a case I got to rule on before I have to rule on it, but my stance always has been that if they need capacity, they buy it, but then there must be a net benefit to the overall customer base of them being here. It shouldn't be a drain on the customer base in order for this business to exist.
Okay. Well, it sounds to me like then you would vote no on such a request if, in fact, it increased rates on consumers, even though consumers weren't benefiting. But then the question is, how do you define benefit? How does your body define benefit?
And that's what the process that the Public Service Commission and the Public Utility staff go through to provide an appropriate recommendation.
Okay. Well,
and that's what we'll have to do as we go through the process to define what benefit means and how we're going to proceed going forward.
Okay. Well, I think you understand, though, that the concern that folks have is that the law that was passed in extraordinary session for this project, Project Atlas, as it is described, is labeled, it permitted the customer, AWS in this case, to negotiate directly with the electricity provider, Entergy in this case, for what their rate would be, which I don't have a problem with. I mean, they're two private entities that are negotiating, but that was done outside, right, of the scope and purview of the PSC. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So an exception was made in the law that permitted that separate negotiation. But I think if you look closely in the law, there's some language in there. I think it was Section 22, if I recall, that basically said that it precludes Entergy from requesting rate increases of the PSC to fund their investment to, again, handle Amazon. But it just looks like in this Cosmos request that they, in fact, are asking consumers and other ratepayer classes to bear some of this cost.
Well, what I'll say is that what I'm going to do as a regulator and how I approach it is we're going to govern to the full extent of the law that the legislature's given us.
Okay. So
I'm not trying to dodge the question here, but I'm trying to.
It feels like it, though.
I'm trying to make sure that my pillar is if a large load customer needs something to run their business, the citizens of Mississippi shouldn't have to shoulder the burden of it. That customer should take their resources and purchase what they need to run their operation.
Okay. Well, I think the citizens would appreciate that.
I don't want to, because what happens if I speak about something and I got a rule on, then the central district will lose its vote because I'll get kicked off of even ruling on the daggone thing.
I got you. Well, this was filed August the 7th. Looking at the stamp on the document right here. From the Mississippi Public Service Commission. When do you guys have to make a call on this to approve or reject this request?
We'll go through the process that we go through with every review through the Public Utility staff and the Public Service Commission. We got a great staff that's in place. They just handled a lot of major cases like the Atmos case we just got done with.
Yep.
And we'll go through the process with this one as well.
Okay, but so I mean, there's no deadline that you guys have.
We'll give about 60 or 90 days, and we'll get to a point where a ruling is in place.
And I'm asking that as a question.
Yeah,
is there like a rule or a policy or law that says, hey, that PSC has to provide a ruling on rate requests within a certain time period after receipt?
Well, from my standpoint, I don't rush things. I make sure that it's done right and prudent the first time, so we don't have to go back and forth on issues, and we make sound decisions.
So you're not compelled by any law or regulation or hard, fast rule? I mean, you could sit on this for like a decade if you wanted to.
Nah, because it'll stop other operations. We got so much coming.
But you could, though. I mean, there's no law that compels you to rule within a certain period of time.
We have to give them reasonable responses, and because it'll be piled up. You'll have years and years.
Well, I get it. I mean, I understand the practical aspect. I'm really referring to the legal aspect. So there's no legal requirement that you provide an answer within a certain period of time.
I would say we should provide a ruling within a couple of months. It shouldn't take forever to decide.
Okay. Well, and obviously they're investing all this money right now, so I think they're counting on.
The biggest goal for here, we should be looking to form an effective partnership with every utility customer, large and small.
Sure.
And we should have effective ability to regulate these entities.
I totally agree.
And we got to ask ourselves some serious questions. When you're dealing with people with a $2.4 trillion market cap, what type of regulatory environment do we want in place? Let's say they go out.
Hold that thought. We'll keep talking after the break.
Purchase Entergy or purchase Great River.
I'm with you. DeKeither Stamps, Public Service Commissioner for the Central District, in the Element Wealth Studios, our guest. We'll continue this discussion on the other side. Stay with us. That's the great Smokey Robinson. I went to a business event. This has been a long time ago when I was able to see the great Smokey Robinson perform. It was out in Phoenix, and a handful of us that had won some awards that night got to go backstage and meet with him. So I have a picture of my house of my wife and I with the great Smokey Robinson.
One of the best.
So, He looks so young.
I know. Incredible. Timeless. And he had on a hand-sewn, I remember because it's in the picture, tailored, kind of lemon-colored sport coat. It looked fantastic on him, by the way. So, yeah, what a pleasure it was to be with him, and super talented. But digressing a bit, we're talking to Public Service Commissioner for the Central District of Mississippi, DeKeither Stamps. All right, so explain to the people what you just explained to me, that you're prohibited from talking about discussing rate requests like this to the point where you would tell publicly before you've had the official opportunity to rule as a commissioner. If you talk about that ahead of time, you're not able to do that, permitted to do that. Well, how you're going to rule.
Right. We have a quasi-judicial function at the Public Service Commission where we make rulings.
Okay.
We should not be answering questions about how we're going to rule before we've been formally presented a case. It's kind of like the judges. You asking a judge, hey, before you get presented this murder case, how are you going to rule on it? Here's some basic information that you have. Well, they haven't done their due diligence or their process that they're allowed to go through to present a case.
Yes.
And I don't want the Central District to lose its voice at the table when the deal is in the Central District.
Okay. So I'm going to share this, Will, if it's okay with you. Haley Fasackerly, who is, of course, the CEO of Entergy, who's been on the program many times. And so I think there's some confusion. And look, I freely admit I could be confused. I'm not in the habit of the practice of reviewing rate request documents that are submitted to the public service. So he just said AWS is paying 100% of the cost for Cosmos and all substations that serve their data centers. Well, and that's what I always thought. And that's what, as I recall, Haley, if you're listening, that's what Section 22 of the law, right? That formed up the incentive package and the investment the state was making as part of this. So he said the chart shows the methodology used to calculate rates because assets have to be placed into rates, but the rate AWS pays goes to cover 100% of the revenue requirement. The customers get the benefit of AWS revenues through a different mechanism. You have to look at the net of the two. Okay, that makes sense. Appreciate that, Haley. I get it. So, and there's no bigger proponent and supporter, and Haley knows that, and you know this, of this project. I think it's transformational to the state.
Most definitely.
There's no doubt. And I think we're about to see, wink, wink, some new announcements here pretty soon as well.
That's
You're
right.
aware of that as well. And Entergy is making massive investments in new generation and transmission to not only accommodate AWS, but to modernize the grid overall, something you talk about all the time, that consumers deserve reliability, and I agree.
I want the consumers to have just as reliable service as any of the large load customers. If they have 99% uptime, I want the citizens to have the same dependable, reliable service. But these grids were put in place back when folks just had some lights in the house and a washing machine. But now the whole grid has users where everyone in the house has an iPhone and a computer and an iPad, and you're plugging everything in. And now that grid needs to be overhauled.
Well, the demand for electricity has exploded the way the demand for data is. And to your point about all the stuff we have in our houses now, I read a report not too long ago that predicts we're a few years away from the average house having 400 things in it connected to the internet.
At all times.
Yeah. And you think about all the stuff I have now, I'm thinking, I feel like I'm pretty close to that now because we all have these lighting controls and whole house audio controls and HVAC controls and locks and security, and it's all affordable to almost everybody. That was for, the very affluent 25 years ago, but now this is commonplace. And all your appliances, as you pointed out, heck, they're all connected to the electricity, but they're also connected to the internet, right? Most of these smart appliances are. So we're seeing kind of a parallel trend of we need more connectivity and low voltage bandwidth, if you will, but we also need more electricity to power all those devices. And so I applaud this. I think it's great. I just know, and I know Haley and I have had this discussion as well, that if there's any indication that consumers are going to bear the cost of this massive investment that Entergy is making to power AWS, that's not only going to be a problem, that seems to me to be inconsistent with the law and with the expectations and understanding. So I appreciate the fact that you can't tell us how you're going to rule on something that you guys haven't gotten to. That's part of the process, and honestly, that makes sense to me.
But I can give the citizens assurance that what we're going to do is stick to the same pillars that we talked about the whole time with all these hyperscalers and all the large load customers, is that they should bear the brunt of what's necessary for their operations to run.
I think everybody's on board with that. And so is AWS.
And so is AWS.
Yeah, they've made it very clear. They don't want to pass on the cost of the energy, the electricity they consume to consumers. They want to be good corporate citizens.
Exactly.
They made that very clear, and I think they will be. But you being an elected official, of course, the people expect you to stand in the gap and make sure that this is ruled on fairly to all involved.
One of the things that we always focus on is not losing our ability to be at the table and to be able to speak up for the Central District. That's why we don't speak on things before it's time.
Sure.
Because we don't want folks to kick us off the case because of something we said in an interview or something we said publicly. We want to be at the table and able to do the job they elected us to do.
Yeah. And you know what's got people particularly interested in this is that it is true that in some states it looked to me like the result of lack of proper planning. They ended up kind of being blindsided with additional jacked up demand for electricity when these data centers started building out a few years ago, and now they're sort of caught a little bit blindsided without sufficient electricity to power them and their normal load, and that's causing problems, and it's causing rates to go up, to have to go invest more to accommodate that.
We need these kinds of effective partnerships with effective regulation.
Sure.
Because how will we meet the demands that the citizens have for the future without having partnerships like AWS and the rest of them to shoulder when we want to, like, I'm a big proponent of nuclear.
Right.
Well, how do we get there?
We've talked about that.
We need more nuclear, but who's going to bear the burden of that? How are you going to shoulder and shoulder that burden of the cost of it?
Yeah.
You need these kinds of partnerships to be able to do those larger things that's necessary in this situation when we have a declining population.
And honestly, when Haley's been on, he's explained that as well, that we're actually benefiting from the economies of scale here, that that the Entergy and electricity providers, all utility providers, they constantly have to modernize their infrastructure and their facilities, that when you're fortunate to have one big customer come in that's going to consume a lot and pay for a lot, that we all benefit from that economy of scale. I totally agree with that. It makes perfect sense to me, especially when you look at the sort of revenue that's going to generate for Entergy to cover those costs. So I think there are some cascading positive impacts of that. There's just concerns that, hey, what's in this contract between Entergy and AWS may be some underwater rate. And I've had people push that narrative, and I've said, well, you don't know, and I don't either, and we're not entitled to know.
Well, anybody with an iPhone can figure it out. Because all you got to do is pull out your calculator and say, okay, well, how much power did Entergy use on a month-by-month basis, and then how much revenue did it increase? If you put those months side by side with the construction of the project,
I hear you.
Then you can use a calculator to figure out all the things you need to figure out.
And actually, I've done that. So the way I see it, it's commensurate. I mean, the revenue being generated is commensurate with the expense. That's what you want to see. That means that we don't have some backdoor rate negotiated that is going to end up causing Entergy to be upside down on their expense versus revenue for this one gigantic customer, and they're going to have to pass that on to consumers. I don't think that's the case, based on the little math I've done. So
one of the main things we got to look at is what type of regulation do we want?
Yeah.
And say, okay, if you have entities that are as large and have more capacity than most countries in the world, that means they have unlimited money.
Yeah.
So now what happens when they buy a water system or they buy these other entities that they support? And if they don't buy them, they are such a big customer in these entities that they influence them in such a way. And that's where regulation and having more powers and abilities to regulate. I'm always going to champion for the ability to be able to regulate in a more effective way to balance out
Agree.
how we're going forward.
And I want to be clear, I supported this provision in the bill that permitted Entergy and AWS to negotiate separately because, honestly, Commissioner, we still may be talking about this project had that not been the case to work through the process. I think that fast-tracked it, which is good.
And as we look at these things, we have to understand that these laws and regulatory operations will be in place for hundreds of years.
Yeah,
this is not something like a normal manufacturing plant that may be a short term.
You're right.
These are decisions that will be 100 and 200 years from now still in place.
Okay.
And so that's how we got to approach how we regulate and how we
Appreciate you
govern.
coming in.
Thanks a lot.
As always, DeKeither Stamps, Public Service Commissioner for the Central District. We're coming right back.